The city had never felt so heavy for Maya until the night her uncle walked through the door with that half-drunk smirk and a promise he could never keep. He had always been the kind of man who could charm his way out of any corner, but this time the shadows seemed to follow him inside. He smelled of whiskey and desperation, and even before he spoke, Maya knew something was wrong. Her little brother Leo was in the next room, humming lines from the commercial he'd just filmed that afternoon, his tiny voice full of hope. That sound was the only light in their cramped apartment, the one thing that made all of Maya's double shifts and late-night hustles worth it. Their parents were long gone. Her mother had passed when Leo was barely 3, and their father had vanished into debt and silence not long after. All they had left was each other and the uncle who'd shown up claiming to help, though Maya had learned the hard way that his help always came with a cost. For months he had been managing Leo's budding acting career, booking him gigs, smiling for cameras, talking about a bright future, but Maya had begun to sense that money was disappearing faster than it came. When she finally confronted him, he laughed it off, telling her she worried too much, that show business wasn't for the faint-hearted. But that night, when his laughter trembled and his eyes darted toward the window every few seconds, she realized there was something far darker behind his excuses. He told her the truth in fragments, as if saying it all at once would break him. He owed money to people who didn't forgive. The mob, he whispered, the word heavy as gunmetal. He had borrowed against future profits from Leo's next project, convinced that the boy's face would be their ticket out of poverty. When the deal fell apart, the threats began. Maya felt the world tilt beneath her. She wanted to scream at him, to throw him out, but Leo's voice carried from the next room, innocent and unknowing, and that sound stopped her cold. Her uncle promised he could fix it if she just trusted him one more time. He had a plan, he said, a way to make quick money and keep the mob at bay until Leo's next film came through. But Maya didn't trust him. She saw the panic behind his bravado. Days turned into weeks, and the tension wrapped around their small home like barbed wire. Maya worked extra hours at the cafe while trying to keep Leo's auditions going, juggling school paperwork, child services visits, and bills she could barely pay. Every knock on the door made her flinch. Then, one afternoon, 2 men in suits waited outside Leo's studio. They didn't say much, just looked at her uncle with a warning in their eyes. That night, her uncle packed a bag. He told Maya it was just for a few days, that he was going to smooth things over, but he didn't come back. Instead, a phone call came. A voice she didn't recognize told her the debt was now hers to worry about, since her uncle had used Leo's name as Katseye. The illusion began to crumble the moment Maya realized how deep her uncle's deception had gone. What she thought was a temporary disguise had become a full-blown performance, one she could no longer control. The people managing her now weren't managers at all, they were collectors, the same men who had once come to her door with threats disguised as smiles. They saw profit in her resemblance to Lara, profit in the chaos it could create. They arranged appearances, photo ops, private parties where she'd play the part and keep the cameras clicking, each event paying off a little more of the debt her uncle had left behind. Maya told herself that every step, every lie, was for Leo. As long as he stayed safe, she could handle the rest. But lies had a way of multiplying, feeding on themselves until the truth could no longer breathe. The real Lara had returned to the public eye just weeks after Maya's first appearance, and the tabloids went wild trying to piece together the mystery. Some thought there were 2 of her. Others whispered about surgery, about body doubles. The frenzy made it impossible for Maya to simply vanish. The collectors wouldn't let her quit now, not when her face was trending, not when the money was flowing again. She was their golden ticket, even if it meant trapping her in a lie that grew heavier by the day. Maya tried to reach out for help, but every door she knocked on led back to the same men. They had their hands in every part of her life now, her phone, her apartment, even Leo's school. When she found one of them waiting outside the gates one afternoon, leaning against a car and watching her brother play, she understood the unspoken threat. They didn't need to say anything. She would keep playing Lara, or Leo would pay the price. So she smiled for the cameras and sang along to tracks she barely knew, pretending to be a star while inside she was breaking apart. Fame was a cage line with mirrors, and each reflection showed her a version of herself she didn't recognize anymore. Sometimes she'd catch her own face on a billboard and feel sick, because she wasn't looking at Maya anymore, she was looking at the stranger she had become. Still, Leo believed the act was temporary. He thought his sister was working extra hours to keep their home, that the fancy clothes were borrowed, that the makeup was just for a play. He didn't know that she was living someone else's life just to protect his. But the more famous she became, the harder it was to keep him hidden. Reporters began digging into her past, fans speculated about her family, and one journalist even showed up at the cafe she used to work at, asking questions Maya couldn't afford to answer. Every lie she told created a new danger, every silence left room for someone else to fill with their own version of the truth. Then came the night it all began to unravel. A charity gala, glittering lights, flashing cameras. Maya stood there, draped in designer silk, smiling beside Minshi. The world had moved on faster than Maya could have imagined. The headlines that once screamed her name had faded into newer scandals, fresher stories, brighter faces. The chaos that had consumed her life became just another piece of entertainment for the audience who had never known the truth. Months passed before she could look at herself in a mirror again without feeling sick. She was living in a small coastal town now, far from the city's glare, under a name that wasn't hers but fit her quietly, like a borrowed coat that had finally grown comfortable. Leo was enrolled in a local school, his laughter brighter, his shoulders lighter, no longer shadowed by the danger that had once followed them home. For the first time in years, he was just a kid again, not a child actor or a bargaining chip or the nephew of a criminal. Maya watched him every morning as he ran down the narrow lane to the school bus, and every time he looked back to wave, something in her chest ached, guilt and love twisted together like twin vines. She told herself that what she had done was unforgivable, but necessary. That the lies, the humiliation, the ruin of her name had bought him this peace. Yet some nights, when the sea wind howled through the shutters, she'd wake up drenched in sweat, hearing echoes of the stage lights, the flash of cameras, the whisper of her uncle's voice. The past clung to her like a ghost that refused to fade. She had tried therapy under a false identity, even confessed parts of her story anonymously online, but nothing ever quite lifted the weight. Until one afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, her on stage beside the real Lara, the moment everything had fallen apart. On the back, written in elegant handwriting, were the words, "You deserve your own song." It was signed only with an initial L. Maya's hands trembled as she held it. For the first time since that night, she cried not from shame, but from something like release. Maybe Lara had meant what she'd said during the trial, that Maya's story deserved to be heard, not hidden. The thought terrified her as much as it comforted her. She'd built her new life on silence, on the safety of anonymity. Speaking out would risk exposing Leo again, undoing everything she had fought for. But the idea took root in her mind like a stubborn seed. The next day, she opened a blank document on her old laptop and began to type, not as Lara, not as Maya the fraud, but as the girl who had once just wanted to keep her brother safe. The words poured out, raw and unfiltered. She wrote about her uncle's manipulation, about the fear of losing custody, about the mob's threats, the mirrors, the lies, the moment she saw herself vanish behind another woman's face. Days turned into weeks as she wrote, not for fame, not for forgiveness, but for truth. It was the first honest thing she'd done in years. She didn't know what she'd do with it when it was finished, maybe publish it anonymously.